We've had a last-minute quick change on some of the speaker order, so I would love to welcome to the stage someone with a rather phenomenal title and responsibility, the head of artificial intelligence and machine learning at the World Economic Forum. Kay Firth-Butterfield, please take to the stage.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, you were expecting Jeremy Wright and you've got me. I apologize about that, but don't worry too much because in 10 minutes he will be here with you. So my job is to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing at the World Economic Forum since I was here a year ago. A year ago, we had one office at the center of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and that was in San Francisco, where I'm based. Now, my job has grown probably more exponentially than the tech has, because we have offices also in Beijing, Mumbai, and Japan. And we have affiliate offices in the UAE, Colombia, and Israel. And within the next couple of months, I'm expecting 2 more in Africa, and then 15 more within the next year. So I'm a busy person. Not only that, we have just established, as you may have read in the press, the last week in May, a Global Artificial Intelligence Council. And the Global Artificial Intelligence Council, some of their members are here in the front row, and some of them will join me and Jeremy Wright for the panel at the end of this session. Jeremy himself represents the British government on the Global AI Council and is one of 7 ministers actually on the council, ranging from countries around the world. So, with that introduction, what have we been doing since I stood here a year ago, apart from expanding? We have been creating projects with governments and businesses around the governance and policy of artificial intelligence. So when I say governance, I don't mean government, but sometimes we are working with governments. But as you may well know, the World Economic Forum is an impartial international organization for public-private partnership. So any of the work that we do has to have a multi-stakeholder group working on it. So that's academics, civil society, international organizations, business, and government. And also, any of the projects that I tell you about in a moment all have to be cut through with 3 pieces: social inclusion, ethics and values, and human-centered design. So the best way that I can demonstrate what we do is to tell you a little bit about the project that we're actually doing with the UK government, with Jeremy Wright's ministry. We have now, in November of last year, a fellow came from the Office of AI to San Francisco, and we started work co-creating some best practice guidelines for the procurement of artificial intelligence by the British government. You may well know that procurement by governments around the world is valued at $9.5 trillion a year. And so any government putting its procurement policy behind policy around artificial intelligence is going to have a major impact. So currently we have created 10 high-level guidelines against which the procurement officers will judge whether or not to procure a piece of artificial intelligence that is being pitched to them. we're just about to finish at the end of August a workbook which actually helps them to work out what those 10 high-level principles actually mean to them in practice. We will then pilot for 6 months or so these guidelines and the workbook in a real ministry situation. And hopefully at the end, we will either have come up with a good product straight off the bat, which is unlikely, or we will iterate. There are then 8 other governments already from countries around the world looking to use this tool, and in some emerging countries really look at it to leapfrog, to kickstart their AI economy. So although we work with one country, in this case the UK is actually providing that leadership globally in order to ensure that we can put global best practices in place around AI governance. On the other side, we work with businesses to think about what it means to have AI in your company. When we did our survey, we found that a lot of boards of directors really didn't understand artificial intelligence or how it might be applied in their company for good or ill. And so what we have done is we've worked with a number of our partners, including Best Practice AI, represented here at the front, Lathams and Watkins, who you'll meet Karen Silverman shortly, and Jesus Mantas from IBM, and a number of other stakeholders, multi-stakeholders, to really produce a toolkit for boards to really dig into what it means, what are best practices around the adoption of AI in their companies. One other little vignette into the work that we're doing is around children. So we're working with UNICEF and a number of other stakeholders, including child development psychologists and psychiatrists, to really think about what are the best practices for toy companies as we bring AI-enabled toys onto the market and into our education system. And so what I want you to think about is the child who starts talking to the AI-enabled toy. What does that do to our children's development? If their toys no longer have to have them make up the backstories for them, they come pre-programmed with it, how then do we as humans create all those imaginative things that we used to do when we were playing with our toys that didn't talk to us? If we form great relationships with our toys, do we really want to be bothered with those nasty human beings in the playground that make us cry? What is the advertising perspective if the doll says to its parent, "I'm cold," and the parent buys a jacket? Is that advertising, or is that part of the conversation that's going on between toy and child? And perhaps most importantly, who gets to own the data that our children are giving to these toys? Because we all know how little data Cambridge Analytica needed to be extremely influential. So these are vast topics about what makes us human that we're actually trying to dig deep into, creating policy and frameworks, business frameworks around these issues. So in my closing 30 seconds, I just want to say that we have a lot of work to do. The Global AI Council came up on the 29th of May with 10 more things for us to do. We meet, courtesy of the Minister, later on this afternoon to dig into what we are going to do. But when I stand here next year, I hope we'll have done a great deal more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kay. You're right, we've got a lot of work to do. And that's why I'm so thrilled that you're all here, because many hands make light work, many brains make light work. You're going to wait for your panelists. Wow, I introduce Jeremy Wright, the Secretary of State for Digital, Media, Culture and Sport, a good friend and the support of the UK government's AI Council that I chair as well. So I'm thrilled to and very excited to hear what he's about to say. So thank you so much for coming, Jeremy.
Well, thank you, Tabitha. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here at CogX and, of course, at London Tech Week. And I hope you'll forgive me if I indulge in a little bit of boasting, because this important festival of technology provides an ideal moment to celebrate the technology and the ingenuity of this city and of this country, and, of course, to take stock of the progress that we have made. We are, as you know, a nation with a rich history of innovation, from Ada Lovelace to Tim Berners-Lee to Sophie Wilson. And the UK is Europe's leading tech hub, and we generate more billion-dollar businesses in tech than any other country on the continent. Our inward AI investment stood at over £1 billion last year, more than Germany, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Switzerland combined. Amazon, Apple, Google, IBM, and many more major companies have bases in the UK or will soon be setting up here. And they thrive alongside a network of emerging startups and scale-ups. But we can't see innovation as solely the preserve of private companies. It also has the potential to solve some of the great public sector challenges. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. How governments can make the most of new technologies like AI in a way that creates a stronger relationship between citizens and the governments that represent them. And how AI has the power to deliver smarter and more targeted public services and to address some of the major social issues that face us all. As a nation, we've been pioneers for digital government. The first stage of this work was putting our government services online through our single gov.uk portal, an approach that has been replicated all across the world. This has not only saved billions for taxpayers in the UK, but has given users a more positive experience of their interactions with government. You can do anything on gov.uk, from getting a divorce to finding out how to import a ferret, though I don't think anyone's tried both on the same day. Automation and AI present a huge opportunity to make online services more effective and more efficient. Used properly, they mean more accurate predictions, improved accuracy, and smarter decision-making. And for people working in the public sector, it will free up time to spend on thinking of more innovative ways to improve services. UK government websites lead the world in user-centric design, but there are still processes that can be transformed, everything from tax returns to planning applications, using intelligent automation and machine learning. And we're investing money and resources into making this a reality. Last year, the Prime Minister announced plans to expand the use of AI in our health sector, using the latest machine learning technology to equip doctors with the most advanced AI technologies so that they can diagnose life-threatening diseases earlier and more effectively. And in my previous role as Attorney General, I saw how the use of AI made it easier for the legal sector to sift through evidence and process contracts. Now, we want to maintain this momentum and encourage even more of this work throughout the public sector. So today we're publishing a new guide to help leaders across the civil service understand how AI can be used to solve problems within departments. It's aimed at those working in the public sector, although it draws on best practice from a variety of different areas in the economy. And we've worked with the Alan Turing Institute, the UK's National Institute for Artificial Intelligence, to produce additional guidance on AI ethics and safety in a public sector context. We're making a real effort all across government to support the early adoption of new technologies. Now, whether that's supporting AI to deliver public services, using government buildings to support the deployment of 5G, or opening up data. Because governments are in a privileged position in that they have large amounts of data at their disposal. And as this data becomes more and more sophisticated, the opportunities for the public sector are growing exponentially. For example, the UK's Border Force has been using sophisticated analytics to use flight information to assess the risk of modern slavery. And we need to make the most of opportunities like these. We've seen some real benefits from sharing between different public services here in the UK. For example, one fire service in the UK has been using data on food hygiene to predict the likelihood of fire and proactively visit those at risk. They knew that premises with low food hygiene ratings have a strong correlation with a poor fire safety record, and saw the potential of cross-cutting data, as many organisations are doing across the public services. And to build on this work, today DCMS is launching the first part of a public consultation on a national data strategy, together with a call for evidence. This will provide impetus to the wide range of data-led work across government, culminating with an action plan for how government, business, academia, and the wider public sector can work in partnership. It will look to engage with all parts of our society, and I hope that you will join the conversation to help us get this right. Because the value of government data can reach far beyond the public sector, and so we want to open it up to others who want to use it in a safe and ethical way. And we've seen some fantastic alternative uses from government data sharing. Just look at the Environment Agency's LiDAR data. These 3D maps of landscapes are critical in modelling flood risk, but they've also been used by architects and city planners. They can even be imported into Minecraft. Data can often yield positive outcomes that we might not always be able to predict when we choose to open it up. So this week I wrote to DCMS's arm's length bodies to urge them to support our firm commitment to making data and information accessible to the public wherever possible. We want to make it even easier to unlock the value of data across the economy by reducing the friction costs of data sharing. Organisations looking to access or share data can currently face a range of barriers, from trust and cultural concerns to practical and legal obstacles. So the Office for AI, a joint unit between my own department and the business department, along with Innovate UK, has partnered with the Open Data Institute. They're exploring a type of data sharing framework called a data trust, a legal structure that provides independent stewardship of data. The ODI worked with 3 pilot projects focused on diverse social challenges, each examining whether a data trust could increase access to data while retaining trust. The work found a huge demand from private, public, and third sector organisations to explore data trusts and other data stewardship models. Because data is the fuel that powers our digital economy. And governments that promote the safe, appropriate, and ethical sharing of valuable data can further stimulate the market for those products and applications that can make the world a better place. Now, even beyond data, governments and public services have many levers they can use to create the right environment for new technologies to flourish. Only this week, the Prime Minister announced that we will invest up to £13.5 million in new conversion courses to grow specialist AI and data skills. This scheme will provide another 2,500 places at universities throughout England and will sponsor up to 1,000 of those places to improve diversity and representation in the future AI workforce. And we will invite industry to offer match funding to help build and support these courses. Government can also have a huge influence through their procurement practices, putting our money where our mouth is and thinking carefully about what we buy and who we buy it from. Now, I know this is not perhaps the most exciting topic, but it is a crucial one, and the benefits here can be immense. If we get this right, we can make sure that our public procurement encourages innovation in the AI sector, and we're working with the WEF and its Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, as you've heard, on how we can drive this change. And this also provides an opportunity for our innovative tech-driven organisations to access the public service market, so we can use government's purchasing power to benefit society. So we will also be publishing a complementary guidance to help them understand how to navigate procurement processes. And I would encourage all socially minded tech firms to get involved in this work. as well as to apply for TechNation's new Applied AI 1.0 program, which opens today. And that will support tech founders who have a clear vision for how their products solve real-world problems and who are applying artificial intelligence in practical areas to create a positive social impact. Applicants for the 6-month program will be selected by a judging panel made up of leading AI experts, with successful entries starting the program in September. Regulation is also a crucial part of the picture. Digital technologies cannot thrive when they're subject to regulation developed in an analog age. And so we're working with our regulators to make sure we have regulatory systems in place that reflect the fast-paced nature of new technologies. The Financial Conduct Authority's Greentech Fintech Challenge is a strong example of that. It supports a number of firms, including many of our dynamic startups, in developing products and services to help our transition towards a greener economy. The challenge provides guidance and live market testing, which can be essential in helping a product overcome the hurdles faced by businesses that want to try something different for the greater good. And that's an approach that's been emulated worldwide. More than 20 countries have adopted sandbox schemes that we pioneered in the UK to foster the development of innovation. This work is bearing fruit, and the OECD has given the UK its highest overall score for the quality of our regulatory practices. And I want the UK to be a global leader in encouraging this transformative technology and its socially responsible use. Because governments must be leading, not following, the exceptional change we're seeing. And the best way to do that is through the public services that people use every day. Public services are, at their heart, all about improving the lives of citizens. And the AI revolution has given governments a real opportunity to do this more efficiently and more effectively. But no government can do it alone, and nor would we want to. We will need the talent and enterprise of our businesses and civil society. Only then can we use AI's transforming power to solve problems, support enterprise, and enhance freedom and opportunity across the world. Because the prize on offer is worth fighting for, a better economy and a better society too. Thank you very much indeed. All right, I'm going to turn next to you. Where do you want me? That one.
This one, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I have a panel of amazing people. So I'd like to invite them up. Karen Silverman from Latham & Watkins. Jesus Mantas from IBM.
Hey, good to meet you. Hi.
Adrienne Lovett from the World Wide Web Foundation. And Alex Benay, who is the CIO of Canada. So just very briefly, as I say, this is a wonderful panel, so I'm going to be very brief in introduction, but you won't know how wonderful they are unless I tell you a little bit about them. As you know, Jeremy Wright is the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and prior to that was the Attorney General, having entered politics in 2010. Prior to that, he, like me, was a barrister, but he was a criminal law barrister. Karen Silverman is also a lawyer, a partner at Latham & Watkins, which is a global law firm, and she heads up their burgeoning practice on governance and oversight of AI and related tech. She is, by background, an antitrust lawyer, having seen many hundreds of deals and strategic initiatives through regulatory hurdles. She managed their San Francisco office and leads their partnership with my office in San Francisco, the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Jesus Mantas is... I'm not a lawyer. No. Jesus Mantas is not a lawyer. He is managing partner responsible for global strategy offerings, innovation platforms, and mergers and acquisitions for IBM's Global Business Services, which is a $17 billion unit of IBM. He serves on the board of directors of a leading neuroscience company, Biogen, and has a number of awards, including being one of the top Hispanics in IT. He too serves on the Global AI Council. And so Jeremy, Karen, and Jesus are all on this Global AI Council that I have mentioned, which the forum started in May. Beside Jesus is Adrienne Lovett, who is President and CEO of the World Wide Web Foundation. His 20-year career in international development and advocacy has focused on delivering policy change in the Global South, Europe, and America. Prior to joining the WWW Foundation, he was interim CEO of Bono's work, One Charity, and he's a member of the forum's Internet for All Steering Committee and has played a key leadership role in campaigns such as Make Poverty History and the Jubilee 2000 campaign. Last but by no means least is Alex Benay, who is the Deputy Minister of the Treasury Board of Canada, Secretariat, and the CIO of Canada. Prior to his appointment in 2017, he was President and CIO of Canada's Science and Technology Museums Corporation. And between 2009 and 2014, he was the Vice President of Government Affairs and Business Development in Open Text, thereby playing a leading role in Canada's digital industry, as well as promoting a global shift to digital. And so, some questions for my wonderful panelists, starting with you, Jeremy. You joined the Global AI Council, and I'm wondering what lay behind that decision to join, and what are the UK's priorities for global governance in AI?
Well, I think the first thing to recognise, and this is something that I think the Council can helpfully address, is that this is not solely a national question. This is an international question. There are more than one way to look at artificial intelligence, this we know, but I think there is a good deal of common ground among many countries, and I think the WEF has done a good job in trying to draw together some of those strands as to how we might address some of the challenges of artificial intelligence. But one of the most obvious, I think, for governments to wrestle with is to determine for themselves, and to do so jointly where possible, how we set up an ethical framework that goes with this technology. And that's not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because our citizens demand it, but because for me, it is required in order for the technology to develop as we hope it will. If you believe that artificial intelligence will be driven by flows of data, then people will only be prepared for those flows of data to continue if they're confident that that data will be well used, that the ethical framework that surrounds the technology is adequate to protect their data in the way that they would expect. So I think we have to get these ethical frameworks right. We have to do it at national and international level where we can. And we have to do it not just because it's expected of us by our citizens, but also because it's expected of us by those who are developing the technology. So for me, that's why it's important to have these frameworks in place and why it's important to work through the mechanisms that you and I are familiar with in order to make that happen.
Super, thank you very much. So Karen, coming from law, what made Latham and Watkins decide the Global AI Council was a good idea?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me. And I think it's one of the reasons we joined was so that we could participate in conversations with the people assembled here and with all of you. So as a global professional services firm, we represent clients all over the world in all sorts of different sectors, many of them multinational, all of whom are dealing with, or soon will be dealing with, the technologies that we're discussing here, AI for certain, but also its related cousins. Many of our clients are technology companies, but most are not. And particularly for the ones who are not, the ability to think through with them sort of the core ethical issues, business issues, level playing field issues, is really essential. And so for us to get smarter and to get smarter in a way that is meaningful to them, that they understand, and where we can also participate in the conversation, I'm looking for a partnership to do that. The World Economic Forum and the Center certainly was sort of the obvious choice for that. And specifically the work that Kay is doing, as she described it earlier this afternoon, is practical, right? I mean, so you've got all the high-level thinking and all the important questions being raised, but it all ends up being rendered into use cases that we all agree upon and then go to work on very hard, producing something practical that you can implement, test, iterate, and that we can deploy. And when we recommend to our clients that they think about something a certain way, we have the confidence that it's been tested, it's been thought through by the brightest minds, and that it's in some respects already been dinged up a bit, right? I mean, so that it's something that is of practical value. So you put all that together, and the form is obvious.
Thank you. So Jesus from IBM, a huge business thinking with AI. What inspired you not only to join the centre but also the council?
I think it was an easy question to answer for us. On one side, IBM as a company, trust and responsibility is very ingrained in our core values of who we are for over 100 years. It's been the one thing that guides us, and we believe that technology that is trusted is technology that is adopted, especially on the world of business to business, which is our primary focus. If you can't trust the technology, it will be very difficult for you to put technology that runs airplanes or banks or, the infrastructure of the world if you can't really trust that technology. So on one side, the point of trusted AI, ethical AI, is very core to us. On the other side, as one of the leading companies bringing this technology to society, we really think we have a responsibility to steward it properly. And the World Economic Forum and the Center is one of the mechanisms to do that effectively, especially, as Jeremy mentioned, in an international context. IBM, the I, stands for international. We do operate in 172 countries, and we are sought after our clients to really provide that guidance, that stewardship in an international context. So I think our work to date with the center and with the council has been, one, in the education of the principles that clients should be asking about this technology, right? What is the purpose for its use? Who has trained it? With what data? Has it been tested for bias? Is there a human in the loop when there's going to be critical decisions being made? So all of this, I think, is one area that we have worked with the center. And then the other one is the concept of transparency. It's really very important. Unlike programmable technology that you can audit, you can go through the rules and know if a program was intended to do what it did. You can't really, you don't have that tool for artificial intelligence. It really depends on how it was trained, with what data, and it's not an easy, it's a little bit of black box. So anything that we can do from our own research or give tools to the world like the Fairness 360 Toolkit that we donated open source for everybody to keep testing the technology and advance society's knowledge on how do we decode the black box is something that we're going to be interested on.
Super, thank you. So, Adrian, one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about at this Global AI Council was how do we make sure that AI benefits everybody? And that's something that you have been thinking about and talking about. So we all agree that it's vital that we don't allow advances in AI to increase inequality globally. But what, in your opinion, should we be doing about it?
Well, thanks, Kate. I mean, I think there's a number of things that we should be doing. But just first to give an example, 1 million people die on the roads every day. There is the extraordinary prospect, thanks to AI and the related technologies around vehicles, of making that reality a thing of the past. But 95% of those deaths are in low or middle income countries. And we all know that right now, 95% of the thinking about that technology and how it can be applied is not thinking, it's certainly not in and not even about those low and middle income countries. So I've spent the last 20 years or so, as you said in the introduction, working on things like ensuring that kids don't die of diarrhea, the stupidest reason to die in the world, which actually, because 100 years ago, children died around the world of such things. We've eliminated that in large parts of the world. It's still present in some parts, and that's an extraordinary inequality of health outcomes that we have to keep addressing. It would be equally extraordinary, wouldn't it, if we found ourselves in a situation where we made road deaths a thing of the past in the UK and in Europe and in North America and so on, and yet it was still a daily hazard for our fellow human beings in other parts of the world. So I think the answer to your question is three things. Firstly, we're at this 50-50 moment where half the world for the first time is online. That's an extraordinary achievement, but we still have the next half to go. We're nearly 50% of the world still to be connected, and until that happens, it's so much more difficult to see some of these technologies benefiting truly all of humanity. So we've got to push on with that cause to get everyone connected, and not just connected, but making it affordable, making sure there's the digital skills necessary to engage properly and so on. That's one. Secondly, I think we've got to see, and we heard some of this in the Secretary of State's speech, I thought very, very helpfully, seeing the range of risks of how AI can, if we get it wrong, drive inequality. You know, whether that's in the blatant, deliberate, harmful use of, for example, facial recognition technology being used to target ethnic minorities in China, as it is in some cases at the moment, whether it's the poorly managed trade-offs that we don't think enough about, like the impact of automation on workforces, or whether it's the unintended consequences or the design flaws that lead to, for example, predictive policing, targeting policing to certain areas, which produces this spiral of more crime than being reported in those areas, which then increases the targeting, So those ways, I think, and others in which we need to see the range of risks right across the board. And then finally, just building AI capacity in diverse contexts, and including in parts of the world where we don't currently focus the efforts of the investment in this technology. I was in Lagos a few weeks ago with Tim Berners-Lee, who Jeremy mentioned, as we were marking the 30th birthday of the World Wide Web, and seeing the extraordinary drive and intelligence and commitment to using technology there that we saw in a number of situations while we were there, and yet the relative lack of attention and political investment and financial investment getting behind those great brains as we should, just as we get behind the brains here in London and Silicon Valley and elsewhere. That needs to change.
Super, thank you very much. Alex, Canada has committed to working with governments worldwide on AI. Can you tell us why? Is it the same reasons as Jeremy, or do you have any other special examples?
I guess if I would just simply agree, it would make it very boring. So we're going to try to spice it up a bit. I think for us, countries like Canada, it's important. We don't have the industrial scale that the U.S. has. We don't have the scale that China or India have, for example. So it's very important for Canada to work with like-minded countries that share the same values. Because at the end of the day, what we're doing when we're doing AI for service delivery to citizens or economic growth or you name it, we're actually automating national values. And that's sort of what we're gradually becoming in the business of doing. So it's important for Canada to work with like-minded, like-sized organizations because we're kind of stuck between scale and industrial might. And that's important because there's amazing opportunities in AI, and many of you are driving that change, but it's also risky. Because for us, artificial intelligence could accelerate racism or bias, right? Because our data is not clean, for example. And also, how do you deliver legally a service to a citizen in a country where there is a black box delivering that service? What happens in the first court case when that is the case? And actually, we have the battle between IP and transparency and public service delivery. So what was interesting for us, to your second part of your question, is about a year ago, we finished our AI, we have a central procurement organization for the Government of Canada. It ran its procurement for artificial intelligence products and services. We qualified 73 vendors and suppliers. So all of a sudden, we had this massive amount of data, whole bunch of suppliers, and no guardrails, right? And so when that starts to happen, interesting things start to emerge. So we've had to work really hard with those 73 vendors to, we had hard conversations around IP. The sad fact is that many of the organizations qualified on that supply list do not want to release their source code because it's their IP, and I understand that. But how do I deliver a service to a citizen if I can't trace it? I don't have an answer for that. We're working our way through that, but that's a result of doing real things. So another real thing we had to do was we developed the world's first government algorithmic impact assessment tool. It's available on GitHub. It's open source. I encourage you to go find it. But it'll help your organization actually identify the level of risk of the automation that you're facing. So chatbot telling you if a service is open at 8 and you show up at 9, while that might not be super fun if you were fighting traffic for the morning, the risk is fairly low. But when you start making immigration screening decisions, there's a very different level of risk there. So we've developed what we think is the world's first tool. It's important. It was developed fully in the open. We had contributions from Oxford, MIT, 15 different countries, private sector. We need to bring sort of digital age solutions and collaboration globally and not industrial age design solutions to kind of like fight fire with fire, pardon the negative expression. So I encourage you to go find it on GitHub. I'm doing the non-Canadian thing. I'm not being humble. I'm being super brash. But the reason I'm promoting it so much is we want people to use this tool so we can create a body of knowledge of like-minded countries and actually ground it and have a conversation with suppliers. All right, and suppliers which are rightfully driven by profit. But we have very different sort of sets of priorities, but it doesn't mean you can't do something collectively together, which is why the groups like the WEF is so important. So the tool is there. We encourage you to use it. And it's very important because the power struggle dynamic has changed in the public sector, and I'm not sure governments the world over have realized that. 3 Python developers in a basement can do a lot. As we're talking for a few years up here. And that power dynamic, we're not, at least not always in Canada, we haven't realized that shift has happened. So we need these kind of tools to ground the conversation and have real data about the situation.
Thank you. So you mentioned that you brought 15 different countries together to work on that. So that brings me back, Jeremy, to what do you see the difference that this international collaboration between countries can actually make in the governance of AI?
Well, as I said earlier on, I think that it's inevitable that people will say to us, even if we don't conclude it for ourselves, that this is a development of technology that is not limited to national borders. So if you simply try and address this as an individual nation-state government, you simply won't succeed. And we're dealing, of course, with those developing this technology who are collaborating internationally in the technical development of it. So we work closely with Canada, with France, with other countries in the development of this technology. We should work with those countries in the development of the frameworks that must go along with it. The legislative frameworks, the ethical frameworks, the practical measures that we've talked about a bit already, which need to be there. So I think the international collaborative element of this is essential. Now, of course, there are limits. And when we look at something which is not directly AI related, but which I think is a useful parallel, which is the work that the UK government has done on what we've called online harms for shorthand, but essentially how you make sure that the online world is as safe as it can be, what regulatory intervention is appropriate for those, particularly social media platforms. We could have, of course, said, well, look, the internet's global. Until everybody is agreed on what we're going to do about social media, we shouldn't do anything. But I think that's a recipe for waiting too long before you take the necessary action. So I think there's a balance to be struck between waiting for everyone to agree and therefore waiting too long. And I think there is a crucial dynamic here around getting the regulatory and the ethical frameworks, as I said, to run alongside the technological development. We've spent too much of our time, I think, retrofitting our rules onto technology that was already in existence. We've got an opportunity with AI to do that differently, and certainly we should approach it internationally, but I think we should be realistic too, that we will not get every country to agree with the approach that most of us agree is sensible. So let's go along with those that we can take with us, but let's not wait for everyone to sign up, or we'll frankly miss the boat here.
Super, thank you very much. And Karen, Alex mentioned law and the black box and delivering services for citizens. So from a lawyer's perspective, you know, what are the challenges? What are the global challenges that you're facing?
I suddenly feel like I'm representing all lawyers, but which is hazardous, yeah. But so you mentioned that you know, there'll be that first legal case. No question that there's I think of 3 big categories of issue that we're going to be confronted with. One is how will the substantive law evolve? How will the existing legal precedents be applied? How will we think about liability, things like that? And there's a million questions, financial disclosure rules, all sorts of things that sort of will come up. So there's the substantive, how will the body of law evolve? There's the inward-looking, the legal practice will change. Many of you in the room are developing technologies that will impact how we review documents and contracts, how we'll draft contracts and briefs, that sort of thing. So there's the legal tech future of work aspect of that, and laws no more immune than any other industry. And then there's the third piece, which frankly is the one that I'm most involved in and interests me the most, and where the work is probably most aligned with what the forum's doing. And that's how do enterprises govern and oversee technology that is designed to exceed their capacity to understand it or to explain itself, as it gets applied very often. And so as our clients are implementing these technologies that are just enormously powerful for good and for bad, as we've all been discussing, how do the non-technical people, the general counsels, the boards of directors, the non-technical C-suite, how do they exercise their governance and oversight responsibilities around these technologies and what these technologies will do for how they run their companies, their employee relations, their customers, how do they maintain trust, and how do they want to put themselves out in the marketplace? So thinking through, and I think lawyers have a very significant role, not because we ever mitigate risk and not because we always say no, the good lawyers don't always say no, but how we work with clients to help them integrate technologies that are truly innovative, that will truly reach their customers where their customers are, and how do lawyers become an enabling and sort of productive collaborator as you institute guardrails and think through these issues. And so that's where we want to take a leadership role and where we're working with our partners and importantly our youngest associates who are very close to these technologies, to really start thinking like clients and like decision makers and like fiduciaries around the many substantive legal questions, the future of their law practice, but also how are we responsible governors and how are we ensuring that this technology is, if it's not all for good, these are also for profit, how are they at least not for bad? And that's just important thinking, and the lawyers, I think, have an important voice and role in that. I could go on forever about this. So
Okay, well, don't go on forever, but I'm sure that, in fact, you should. So, Jesus, you mentioned a little bit about your commitment to responsible development of AI. And taking that a little bit further, at our council meeting in May, you actually committed to efforts to help bring about certification of AI product. Now, I would say that usually companies say, no, regulation impedes innovation, even quasi-regulations. So what is it about this commitment that you made that was different, and why would you make it?
Yeah, I'd say it has less to do with regulation and more to do with transparency and putting that transparency of these AI principles in a way that the general population can understand. You see, as engineers, we get fascinated by the intricacies of all the technology that goes in there, in the same way that we got fascinated with cryptography when, TCP/IP and the World Wide Web was coming up. But the average person, that is confusing, and confusion is not a good recipe for adoption or for trust, for that matter. So I think our point of view is everyone is unified on this idea. We need more ethical AI, we need more transparent AI, and we need AI that somewhat we can be confident it is doing what we want it to do, because when it does what we want it to do, it can be a phenomenal force for good. But how do we codify that in a way that the world can understand it? You see, today when you go to a browser, you may not be an expert on cryptography, but you see that little lock icon and you see HTTPS, and you have certain confidence that, okay, well, I understand what that means, is data is being encrypted and there is less of a likelihood that somebody is looking at what I'm doing, and that is good, and the lack of that is bad. I think we have this idea of basically we need to create a center of gravity of everybody that is working on this to start cataloging all of those mechanisms, whether it is what Alex mentioned, whether it is our, Fairness 360 AI kit, every kind of mechanism to start codifying in the way that UL in the US codifies that when you plug in, certain thing in your receptacle, your house is not going to burn because somebody tested it. Or here in the European community has the little CE that says when you plug it in, it's not going to burn. Well, I think we need to start coming up with these kites, if you want, of AI that says, well, there is certain tests that we have done that says, there is proper balanced data, so the likelihood of bias is less, or there is transparency on what is the purpose for which you mentioned the toys. What is the purpose to put AI on a toy? There should be some fact sheet that when you buy that toy, you don't need to know about neural networks. You can just know that that toy is safe for your kid, which is the only thing you want to know.
Thank you.
We think that there is a need for that, right?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I only have 8 minutes left, so I really want to hear Adrian. You've said that there should be democratic oversight of how AI should be used in the public space. What would this be, and what would you like to see?
Well, I think, what it exactly looks like is part of what everyone's got to figure out together, and I'll come to that. But, the reason we need this is because at the moment, it seems to us, we don't have settled norms. And no surprise, because this is new, right? We've gone for probably centuries figuring out how to sort of navigate each other, on the streets outside, and courtesies and what passes for sort of normal human conduct and so on. The fact that we're struggling with this in the context of AI in public spaces, to take the specific example you used, is no surprise because it's new and it's challenging. So what I think we can't do is leave these questions only to be settled by the executive branch, which in some places can risk overreach, and in some places can risk neglect, if you like, or by just figuring it all out in the courts. There's got to be a role for a democratic process to try to set some of these norms and expectations. And I think more broadly that sort of points to the role of all of us as citizens. There's a lot of focus, and we at the Web Foundation put a lot of focus on what governments need to do and what companies need to do, and that's right, because there's a good list for each of them. But actually something that we've been working on in the last few months, this idea of a contract for the web, says actually there's three groups that need to take on responsibilities as well as be clear about rights. There's governments, there's companies, but there's all of us as citizens too. And I think without a really active focus in that area, we're not going to solve all these problems. But I think to the specific area of public space, there are some things that we need to figure out and that people should expect around the right to know when an algorithm is making a decision that affects them, the right to be given an explanation about what it's doing, the right to either give or refuse consent to that, and for that to be meaningful, the right to seek redress if there's a breach of one of these things, the right to expect some independent oversight of that whole process. So there's a number of things that have been created, but I think more democratic engagement in order to build those norms would be a good thing.
Super, thank you very much. And Alex, that brings me to the last 4 minutes. To talk about the future of work and the impact of AI on jobs. So no time at all, really. But, is this something we should be thinking about on an international scale, or is it something that nation states really have to grapple with themselves?
Well, I think it's actually the answer is both. I have to admit that we see a lot of hype, a lot of sort of hyped up media statements around, Skynet is coming or the opposite, and so the reality is it'll probably be somewhere in the middle. We are seeing in the government of Canada that robot process automation, for example, at a simplest level is really making a dent in remedial tasks and administrative tasks. We know that JP Morgan in 2017 did 360,000 hours of account verification in a mere seconds. This is a few years ago. So we know we have use cases. We could see it where it's real. It'll probably land somewhere between the hype. It is important that we talk about this globally. There's a labor sort of movement thing that happens as well. The gig economy is impacted by this. But what's important from a government perspective, I think, is that we actually react this time. We're very good at creating our own echo chambers of realities and the data and the things that are going on around this. And we have to bring the technical expertise at the senior policy levels, so that senior policy decision makers don't get influenced by ethical theater by some actors, and that actually technologists understand the impact of that piece of code. And so there's both sides that has to come together when we're going to talk about this labor force. And right now, I'm not seeing, at least enough in our travels, the integration of those two communities. A programmer sitting down with a minister, for example, would be an interesting conversation at any point in time. So that's the kind of interaction and cross-pollination of sectors we're going to have to see increasingly as sort of this workforce discussion emerges. But it cannot, I think to the minister's earlier point, it's not a national-only thing. Canada's talking about it, but we get a lot of our workflow going north-south between Canada and the U.S., for example. What does that mean, right? So those are all conversations. Frankly, it's the funnest time in the world to be in technology, to have these conversations, as long as we cross-pollinate across all these different sectors.
Superb. Well, thank you very much. As I said, an absolutely magnificent panel. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you.